Hello, this is Sophie Lawson from sophielawson.com, and this is episode 212 of the Sophie Art Podcast, which is a little podcast that I do about the art and things. And this one, you might be able to hear in the background, Bobby. Little Bobby looking after my sister's dog Bobby. Bobby. So he makes a lot of noises and he's been farting a lot as well. Which is quite funny. But this one here is going to be what I'm going to talk about is facing fears and how I've noticed there's like an entanglement between fear and desire. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And it's also going to cover things like free will and probability and stuff. So I hope you enjoy this one. You can find show notes and everything at sophielawson.com, and also there's a video on there as well. And if you're watching this as a video, what I'm going to do is tomorrow I'm going to go out and film some footage of stuff like the clouds and flowers and things. So that's what's going to be on the footage. But well, let's get into this. So what I wanted to talk about was I'm absolutely convinced that fear is an illusion. It doesn't really exist. But the thing is, it's very much like imagine you're in a dream and you suddenly realise you're in a dream and yet it feels so real. So it's like a lucid dream. You know you're in a dream, so you sort of, but it's so real. But the thing is, you can wake yourself up at any moment and come back to this. And I feel like fear is that. Fear feels real, but what can happen is you can become like lucid inside of fear and sort of almost like wake yourself up from the fear. But the other thing is, it's an illusion that is so, it feels so real that even when you know it's not real, it's still sort of got like a control over you. And that's the thing. What I've noticed is fear is all about control. So I've been thinking about this because, as I've said before, I'm noticing a lot of, well, what I'm noticing is a lot of my fears, they're all sort of like, it's almost like, let's say you've got 50 different fears. If you look at them, they all look independent, but you can start sort of grouping them together. So like, you might have something like, you've got a fear of, say, talking in front of people. And you've got a fear of, say you've got a fear of going into town or something. And then you've got a fear of getting on a bus or something. And what happens is you start noticing that even though they're all different, they're all the same. And it's all about, it could be, for instance, about you've got a fear of being judged by people. And what it's done is, it's created all these different fears. So a big one for me is interviewing guests on the podcast. And the thing is, what I'm going to talk about is how I feel like fear is entangled with desire. And I look at it as like numbers. So it's almost to me like, imagine you've got like a bar chart. You've got two bar charts and you've got 100, like 100%, and it's been distributed between these two. So you've got a bar chart for fear and another one for desire. And they're sort of like entangled with each other. So if a fear is at 100, it means the desire is at 0. If the desire is at 100, the fear is at 0. So, and the other thing is that you can have like one desire. So you might have like a desire to interview guests on a podcast, but it's actually entangled with a bunch of different fears. So one of them is like you've got a fear of making a fool of yourself. You've got a fear of, are you good enough? You've got a fear of, what will people think of me and stuff like that. And what I've noticed is, what happens is, if you can get that fear, if you can get your desire like the higher you can make your desire to do something, it's going to actually lower all of these other fears. And the other thing is, these other fears might be entangled with other things as well. So it's not as simple as a 50-50 thing, because you might have a fear of, say, of being judged by people, and it's sort of it's come off into multiple different types of fears. So one of them is, say, well, one could be like going out without me hat on. That's one, being judged. Another one could be talking on a podcast or something. So, but the other thing is that, so the thing is that the fear that you interact with is the fear of going out without a hat on, but really that's not the real fear. The real fear is the fear of being judged. So see how quite sort of clever it is, because what can happen is you can sort of spend ages trying to overcome the fear of going out without a hat on, for instance. If you've got, say, like a self-consciousness about your hair or something, when really that is almost sort of like a waste of time, because really you should be focusing on the fear of being judged. Because if you can work out why you've got that fear of being judged, it will instantly, and if you can resolve it, you can instantly delete all these other fears. So that's why it's almost like a domino thing. If you can get to the root of your fears and you can resolve it, it will actually knock out a lot of fears, which is quite cool. But I feel like one of the best ways to overcome the base level fear, is with a desire. So if you've got a desire of doing something and you realise that there's a fear stopping it, if the fear is stronger than the desire, what will happen is the fear is going to be like winning. So the probability, because it's all a numbers game, the probability is that you're not going to be able to create what you want. In other words, you won't be able to create your desire because the fear is stronger. So what you've got to do is, you've got to either go into the fear and basically work out what's happening so you can sort of not be afraid of it anymore, and that's like lowering the fear. Or you can also work on your desire, make the desire so strong that it actually overtakes the fear. In other words, the desire to do something is stronger than the fear of whatever you're afraid of. So I've put, the desire needs to be higher than the fear, or you can activate your free will superpower. So I've talked about this before. I feel like our gift is actually free will, because it seems to me like we are inside a sort of it's almost like a I would say sort of like a simulation, if you want, or some sort of computer system which is all about this fear and desire thing. In other words, it's purely numbers. It's a numbers game. If you work on desire, if the fear is at a certain level, then you're never going to do something because the fear is too strong. So that is like a numbers game. But the thing with free will is like a loophole, which I wonder whether the creator put this free will into us as like a superpower. Because what can happen is, your fear might be at like say 100%. So in other words, the probability is there's no chance of you doing your desire because of the fear. But if you've got free will, it's almost like that free will can turn 100% fear into a zero. Because what happens is, I look at that as like despair. You know that thing when like something happens to somebody and for me it happened with becoming suicidal. I was wearing wigs outside and I had people like laughing at me and stuff in the street. It put me into such a place of despair that the fear had no power anymore. Because what I said, well, I've got nothing to lose now. To hell with it, sort of thing. And it flipped the desire and it eradicated the fear. The thing is, it was only a temporary thing, because what that will do is it'll give you it'll give you like a momentary sort of jolt of power, and you'll be able to create the action. But what will happen is, because you didn't actually sort out the fear, the underlying feeling of that fear, what will happen is, in the future, that fear is going to come back again, because the fear will start to grow in power again. So there's a thing here. I'm actually this week's inspirational quote goes to AJ from DivineTruth, and I was listening to one of his videos, and it made me think about something which, again, I've talked about this before. But what he said was, you've got to flip your mind into the emotion. So I feel like fear is actually based in the mind. This is why it's an illusion, because it's the mind creating a story which gives the fear the power. So fear is all in the mind. Desire, which is a feeling, is all about the emotion. So what's happening is, this is what I'm thinking, if you're living in fear, or if you're afraid to do something, it's because the mind is overpowering the emotion. So what he said was, you've got to flip the emotion to be more dominant over the mind. Now, the thing that's amazing is, the mind is actually quite a good thing as well, because you need the mind to highlight some of these fears, and you can also use the mind to sort of almost like reverse engineer the fears to see where the actual fear really is. But there comes to a point when you need to go into the emotion of it, and that's quite scary, really, because, well, the thing with emotions is, to some extent, you've got no control over them. It's like, once you go into the emotion, you're in the emotion and it's real. But this also reminded me of going towards the energy. Robert Wagner, Lucid Dream expert, he always says, go towards the energy. So I feel like what would happen is, for me, this is like courage. Courage is basically living with the emotion above the mind. Because what will happen is, let's say I want to go to an art class, and I'm scared of it because of like the people or something. What will happen is, and this happened to me back in 2014. The mind was saying, you can't do that, or don't do it, because it felt like it was going to be too scary, because the mind had created this story about how it would be really scary to go to art class. But what happens is, if the desire to go to art class becomes stronger, what happens then is, the emotion of going to the art class has overtaken the fear. And so what I put here, this is what I was thinking. I thought, courage is your mind will say no, as it will feel too scary, but this is the only way. In other words, courage is taking action even when the mind is creating the illusion of the fear. But the other thing is, it actually will be scary as well, because you'll be stepping into the emotion. But this is what AJ's been talking about. Once you step into the emotion and really feel it, you basically like transcend it. And then what will happen then is, you'll be able to go to art class, and there won't be a fear there. You might be a little bit tense, but really I don't think you will be. And the other thing is, you can start doing other things as well. So for me, like, I started going to art class and stuff, and then I started going to like art exhibitions, and it just snowballs like that. So I think this is quite cool. I'll put another quote here. Look. This is what AJ said: all judgment is a denial of your own emotion. And look at this one: true enlightenment is understanding you're a perpetual student. And look, truth equals total emotional nakedness, which is quite scary. But it's only scary because your mind is making you think it's scary. So it's quite strange. It's that other thing I talked about as well. It's like what we're inside of is an illusion, but it's real, but it's also an illusion. So there's this strange sort of thing where it's both at the same time. But I thought that was quite cool. So what I've put facing fears is all about this entanglement between fear and desire. So the other thing I was thinking was, you've got let's say you've got 4 different fears. One of them is let's say it's getting onto a bus. And then another one is, say, walking into a crowded room. Another one is, say, going to art class. Another one is, say, talking to a stranger in a shop or something. What happens is, each of these little fears, they're all the same one really, which is a fear of sort of being judged by people. It's like a fear of self-consciousness. But the thing I've noticed is, each of these little fears has got its own separate sort of number. So in other words, the fear of, say, going into a shop and talking to somebody, that might be like a 30% fear. And then the fear of, say, going into a crowded room might be like 90. So what happens is, this is what I noticed, this is how I did my transition. I sort of reverse engineered it. So the big fear was basically living as Sophie. What I did was I broke it down into these little sort of mini fears, I suppose. And what happens is you get to a point where the fear, you can actually make the fear smaller than the desire. So for instance, even if let's say the lowest fear of those is going into a shop and talking to somebody, if that is still a bit too scary, you can make up your own fear of you can say, well, what could you do? You could say, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this shop, see how I feel, and then come back out. So you don't even have to do anything other than walk into the shop. So that could be the first one. The fear of walking into the shop could be, say, 10. The fear of talking to somebody could be 30. So all you've got to do is do the little one. And then if you do the little one, see how it feels. Also, whilst you're seeing how it feels, you write about what you're feeling, and then you can start seeing how they're all the same thing. And then you can start saying, why do I feel this way? So it's quite sort of, it's quite a long process, but it's also one of these things where once you do it, like I said, it's almost like a domino. It knocks all the other ones over. So why I'm talking about this is because I've still got this fear about interviewing guests on the podcast, and I'm sort of trying to reverse engineer it to see what it's all about. But I'm also trying to take steps to sort of do it as well. So it's a bit sort of, for me, it feels like a 2-step process. So the desire is interviewing guests on the podcast, and then there's a fear with that. But I've also noticed that the fears are the same as other things I've got. Like, for instance, talking to people at work. So the thing is, well, and also there's another one, like, I'm doing this thing at the moment, a masterclass with the SM podcast. There's 8 of us in like a Zoom call. Now that's quite a scary thing for me, but I'm doing that because I think to myself, if I can do this and feel my fears as I'm doing it, I feel like that's going to help me in the future. So again, what I did was I realised interviewing guests at the moment is just a bit too scary. Well, it's not, but it is, because it feels like it is, but it's not. But it's because I guess I haven't made the desire strong enough as well. But what I thought was I'm gonna reverse engineer it, do something that's also scary and has the same fears but isn't as scary, and what it's going to do is it's going to lower the fear of this other one. But what I'm also doing is I'm actually trying to feel the feelings. So this week at work, I had this beautiful moment where what happened was, because what it is my job, I'm a cleaner, so I'm like a contract. So in other words, the people I'm working with, I know them and I can talk to them all, but I'm not really part of the group. It's almost like the people I'm working with are not my co-workers in a strange way, even though I see them every day for like 5 years or something. So it's this strange relationship really where you're sort of like, you're one of them, you're not one of them, but you are, but you're not. So you have this thing where you sort of feel a bit like, well, there was this TV show called Lost, and one of the episodes was called something like he walks among us as if he's one of us, but he's not, basically. It's very much like that. So the thing is, one of those is, there's a fear of sort of not feeling like you're included. And I can start seeing how what happens is, the reality we're inside of brings to us all these things which is going to trigger all these emotions. Because what's happening is it's trying to make you feel all these fears so that you can actually go into them to sort of transcend them. It's beautiful. So in a strange way, all these things which are uncomfortable are actually, they're for our own benefit. It is beautiful for me, because it's almost like it's almost like the reality itself is shaping itself just for you. And that's, for me, makes me feel like reality is actually conscious. What it is we are in a relationship with reality, and it's bringing to us exactly what we need. Now, the other thing that's funny about this is, there's a couple here. So, the place that I've moved into, there was this girl downstairs, little, like, baby, a child thing, and it was crying. Now, for some reason, that was getting to me. It was triggering me, and what I was doing was I was bottling up the emotions of getting angry, because I thought you're not allowed to experience anger. Now, what happened was, a couple of weeks ago, I was lying in bed, this baby was crying. What I did was I allowed myself to feel anger, which I have done that before, only a couple times though. So that's one thing for me. Again, for me it is, I feel like anger is a masculine attribute. So I guess what's happened is, I've sort of shut out a lot of things that I think are masculine. But what I'm doing now is I'm trying to start balancing masculine and feminine traits, because I think we are both of them. So what happened the other day was, this baby started crying, and instead of just sort of thinking, well, what I was doing was I was saying, this too shall pass, which is a nice way to do it, because it sort of it allows you to accept the situation. But this time I thought, you know what, I'm not going to. And because my bed is like a bunk bed type thing. What I did was I jumped out of the bed and just stomped my feet on the floor. And because I was like saying, you know, that was my way of expressing this anger physically. It's almost like I actually had to get the emotion out of my body as a physical action. And what happened was I slammed on the floor. I let the anger out. At that moment, I felt a lot better, because I felt, and also I thought to myself how stupid it was that I was acting that way, and it sort of made me realise how silly it was to be feeling anger, and yet I liked the fact that I felt the anger, because what it also did was it made me think, well, why am I feeling anger? And it was basically because I felt out of control, because I felt out of control that I couldn't speak up about this noise. But then I also realised, well, that's a lie, because if I really wanted to, I could go downstairs and say, can you do something about the baby crying? But the other thing is, so there's this strange thing where I'm not sure whether you should be acting out the emotion. In other words, should I go downstairs and say something, or should I just let it be? So I'm still not sure really on that. But the funny thing about this is, a week later after doing that, the couple downstairs moved out. So the little baby is left now. And for me, that was like one of these synchronicities, as if the universe was saying, look, I want you to accept that inside of you have anger. And again, today, something else happened. And I allowed the feeling of anger to come in. So instead of sort of suppressing it and saying anger is an emotion I don't want to feel, because I think it's masculine, I'm starting to say I'm going to feel it, because I think if you can feel it, you can start working out what it's actually trying to tell you. Because it's almost as if these emotions are speaking to you to say, look, you've got an issue here that you need to sort of resolve it. So that was the first funny thing, was that the baby left. And then the other thing that happened earlier this week was, I was at work, and one of the things I'm doing is I'm forcing myself to speak to people because I've got to basically practice talking to people. So, but I'm only doing it if I've got something to say. So in other words, if I've got something to say, and I want to say it, I've got to say it, which again, it goes into this desire-fear thing. The desire to say something has to be stronger than the fear of, what if I say something and the person ignores me or judges me or something? Now, the funny thing is, I faced the fear of talking to somebody by speaking and saying something. Now, the funny thing is, they actually ignored me because what happened was they had a headset on. This is another thing. They've all got headsets on, so they're all like communicating with each other via these headsets, and I haven't got one. So again, that's making me feel a little bit like I'm the odd one out. But that's another emotion I've got to sort out. But the funny thing is, what happened was this bloke ignored me, and I got hit with this emotion of, well, what happened was I just started crying, and I felt this emotion go through my body. And instead of putting it into my mind and creating a story, which could have then made the fear even stronger to stop me talking in the future, I said to myself, right, just feel it. Feel what's happening here. And so I turned around, carried on cleaning, and I was like crying. It's amazing how many tears can come out so quickly when you're feeling a raw emotion. It's like they were streaming out my eyes. And the emotion I was feeling was rejection. So what I did was, now this is what's quite beautiful, I fully allowed myself to feel it, and within about, I would say, 2 minutes, it's almost like I'd let that emotion go. So I'm not saying I've resolved it, it's just I sort of accepted it. Now in the past, if I had done that, because I've had this before where I've spoke to somebody, they've ignored me, and very often it's because I'm not talking loud enough. So I'm actually realising it's me creating the thing that I'm afraid of by not speaking clearly and loud enough. So in a strange way, I'm sort of creating the thing myself. I'm creating them not responding to me by not projecting my voice enough, which goes back into this other thing of masculine. For me, I've got it in my head that talking loud and sort of confidently is a masculine thing. So again, this goes quite deep for me. A lot of these things, and it's all sort of linked into the same thing, that a lot of my limitations and fears are based around masculine traits, like self-assertiveness, confidence, stuff like that. But so what happened then was I allowed the feeling in, but in the old days what would have happened is I would have felt that rejection, I would have got consumed by the fear, by the emotion of rejection. It would have gone straight to my head, and I would have started saying, nobody likes me, nobody wants to listen to me, when the reality is he had a headset on, he was in the middle of a conversation, so he couldn't have spoke to me anyway. So I let that go. So in the old days, my mind would have took control and started telling the story, whereas instead I allowed myself to just fully feel the emotion. Now what's even funny about this is, about, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes later, I was cleaning, he walked past and he started talking to me. So it was almost as if in that moment, it's almost like the universe was saying, look, it's almost as if that was the universe saying, he's talking to you because you've actually let go of the emotion. Because what I'm thinking is, if I had the emotion in my head, maybe he wouldn't have spoke to me. Because maybe I would have had a different look on my face of like sort of... Because when you're in your head, you have a different look on your face. You can tell when somebody is in their head. Like if I'm watching videos that I've recorded when I'm doing a podcast or something, or even other people, I can just tell when somebody is in their head. Because you can, I don't know how, but you can feel it somehow. So what I'm saying is, he obviously felt that I was open. So he spoke to me, and I thought to myself, but I'll tell you something that did happen. So the first thing is I started talking to him, but then I had this thought go through my head of, now I don't know what this is, but it said, why should I talk to you if you ignored me earlier? Now that is not loving. But I also allowed that thought into my head, because I thought to myself, I'm going to remember this, and I'm going to try and work out, why did that thought come into my head? So this is quite cool, this is. Now the other thing is, AJ from DivineTruth, he talks a lot about these spirit possessions. Now the strange thing about this is, this you could go on for ages about this, but I feel like a lot of the fears are actually based on spirits, which also it could just be thoughts, because I'm not sure yet, but I feel like sometimes these spirits that are possessing us are actually created by ourselves, which does in a way go in with what AJ's saying, because he says the spirit can only attach to you if you've got the emotion that it's attached to. So the thing is, if you've got the emotion, and if you keep creating the emotion, in a strange way you are actually keeping the spirit attached to you. So in a strange way, it is actually you that is attaching the spirit to you. Even though somebody else might have put that initial emotion inside of you. This is why you've got to go and work out what the cause of the emotion is. Because that's how you can actually stop the spirits. But this all starts to sound very sort of magical and stuff, and you could say it a little bit frightening, but I actually think it's incredibly empowering, because you start realising, even if you had the darkest demonic spirit attached to you, you still have the ability to release it. And this also goes into like free will. Let's say you had a demon attached to you, and it's created a situation where basically you're living in fear. You've still got the free will to face it. So I do feel like free will is a superpower. And that's basically it for this one. I just feel like there's a lot of... What I'm noticing is there's a lot of links between physical and spiritual, and also like dreams and reality, because I'm convinced more and more of this, that the dream realm and the sleep state is the spirit realm, and then the waking state. So what's happening is when we're going to sleep at night, we might actually be creating spirits that are influencing us in the waking state, which I believe that is how the waking state is actually sort of like shape-shifting around us. It's based on what we're doing in our sleep state. So this is quite cool for me. And another thing that I'm really getting into is noticing the relationship between masculine and feminine. So for me, I've always felt like I am actually three people. But I've not called them people, I've called them like spirits. I remember this. I used to think this years and years and years before I even knew anything about spiritual stuff. But I felt like, I've always felt like I am sort of like an observer inside of a body that has two spirits, which is a masculine and a feminine, and I actually named them Kevin and Sophie. So what I did was, I was born as Kevin. The spirit of Sophie was so strong, it caused me to turn myself into Sophie. So, and that is full of like desires and fears. The fear of what would people think, and the desire to become Sophie. Now what's quite funny about this is, the more I've become Sophie, the more I realise I didn't really have to. But the strange thing about that is, I had to transition into Sophie to realise I didn't have to, even though I did, because I couldn't have worked it out without doing it. So this is like a paradox for me. And what I'm noticing is, it was never really about physically changing my appearance. What it was actually about feeling both of these masculine and feminine spirits and basically bringing them together. So I feel, well, the other thing is, I sort of knew this right at the start of my transition. So in around about 2016, that's when I started like the hormones and whatnot. And it's also, I remember I said, I'm going to stop focusing so much on art, and I'm actually going to focus on my mind, because I felt like the mind, like the psychologicalness, was actually the foundation of everything else. In other words, to become the best artist, I felt like I had to work on my mind. So, and what I noticed was, what that did was, it took me down the path of transitioning, because my truth felt like Sophie, and it still is the same. Even though I said I didn't have to become Sophie, I did, because otherwise I couldn't have worked this out. So my truth was always Sophie. But the thing was, right at the start, I remember going to a transgender support group, and I started to feel like I was accepting myself. But I thought how funny it is that at the time I was Kevin, and I'm saying I fully accept myself. So to prove that I fully accepted myself, I turned myself into Sophie. In other words, I'm saying I fully accept myself as Sophie. But I thought, isn't it a bit weird that really, if I truly accepted myself, I would actually have stayed as Kevin, because my true self was actually Kevin. Can you see how weird that is? It's almost like by accepting myself, I changed myself. So I thought that was a bit weird. And I look back now and I wonder whether it was like sort of realising that it's more about a mental balancing of masculine and feminine instead of a physical thing. But again, maybe the only way to do it mentally is also to do it physically. So, and this also goes in, I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, is I had an out-of-body experience about 2 years ago where I got given this grid. And the grid, it's like think of it like a cross with a circle in the middle, and then you got the horizontal and the vertical line. One side's got a positive and the other side's got a negative. And that's on the horizontal. The vertical also has a positive and a negative. Now what happens is, you can basically this grid, it's showing the entanglement of opposites, and how you basically have to get yourself centered, which is being resolved, which is 369. 3 is the grid, which is the process of resolving things that are unresolved, which is entangled opposites. Because if something is an opposite, it's out of balance. So you balance things by bringing the opposites together, which is in itself a sort of a paradox. So on this grid, like for instance, the horizontal could be masculine, the vertical could be feminine. So what I'm noticing is a masculine trait, like for instance being, let's say, aggressive, that can actually be positive and negative. So it's a masculine trait of being aggressive, which you think is a negative. But when you look at it, you realise there are times when being aggressive is actually positive. And then you've also got like feminine traits of, say, like giving your love. Again, that is positive, but there are times when that could actually be negative, which doesn't seem to make sense. But you can start seeing how basically masculine has a feminine and a negative, and feminine has a feminine and a negative. So even though masculine and feminine are the entangled opposites, each of these opposites has itself a positive and a negative. So it's almost like what you have to do is balance the masculine, balance the feminine, and then balance the masculine and the feminine. But the thing is, I feel like you've got to do this with every sort of entanglement. For instance, time and money. You put your time into something, putting your time into something can be positive, but it can also be negative. And then you've also got money. So you've positive and negative of money. So again, you've got to balance out the positive and negative of this. But what you start realising is everything is entangled with something, and a lot of them they don't seem to be the same thing. They don't seem as if, like time and money, you don't think it's entangled until you start looking into it. But the other thing is about this is it goes into like the physical and the spiritual as well. So the physical has a positive and a negative. The spiritual has a positive and a negative. In other words, you've got to balance yourself between the physical and the spiritual. So the dream realm is like the spiritual. If you spend all your time sleeping and you're not spending any time in the physical, you're actually out of balance because you're too far into the spiritual. If you're spending all your time in the physical and you're not in the spiritual, you're also out of balance as well. So it's about balancing the physical and the spiritual. So this is quite cool. And I said at the time, because what happened was I had a psychedelic, I've only ever done psychedelics once, which was the 9th of January 2020. And again, this also, what it made me realise was the place that you enter when you go into the psychedelics, it's the same place as the dream realm. It's the same place as the deep meditation states. It's the same place as the out-of-body state. It's the same place as the sleep state. And I would imagine it's the same place as the death. So when you die, it's the same place. The reason it's the same place is it's the spirit realm. Now what AJ talks about is, he says the spirit realm is split into these spheres. So what I'm wondering is it possible that what's happening is, like when we're going into the dream realm, we're actually visiting different spheres of the spiritual. So for instance, an out-of-body state might be a different sphere of the spirit realm. When you go into a psychedelics, what if when you go into psychedelics, you're going into a different sphere of the spiritual? So this also goes into something that I said. I felt like the spiritual realm is like a bunch of bubbles. It's like a bunch of bubbles in an endless sea. So each of these little bubbles is like a sphere, which he also says is like dimensions. So what if there was like a dimension of inside of the spiritual, which is like the psychedelic realm? So in other words, what's happening is the reason that when you go deep within yourself, the reason you always end up in these same sort of places is because you are either in the physical or you're in the spiritual. So no matter which of these things you're going into, whether you're going into a meditation, into the dream state or something, or psychedelic, really you're just in a different layer of the spiritual, like the spiritual plane. So what I'm starting to realise is everything's sort of like fractal. Now what I also think about is the waking state, the physical, is that also fractal? And I believe this is how, because I've got this theory that we're each inside of our own universe. We're each inside, and it's consciousness that is creating each sort of bubble of reality. So each human is in their own reality inside of the main reality, inside like the physical. So it starts to get a bit confusing, but I sort of look at it as like, it's almost like you've got sheets of paper. So you've got like sheets of paper which is creating a 3D object. But really, each of these bits of paper is a 2D piece of paper, but they are holograms. So each of those sheets of paper is actually a 3D shape, even though it looks like it's a 2D shape. And this is how you end up with 3D shapes inside of a 3D shape, which I think is what the spirit realm is as well. Because each of these little spheres is effectively, you can look at it as like a reality, really. It's a spiritual reality inside of a spiritual plane. So this is cool. But the other thing about this is, so this is where it comes into desire and fear. What I'm imagining is, if you can, like, what I'm thinking is some of these desires we have, well, AJ says it comes from your soul. So I sort of think to myself, are some of these desires coming from higher spheres inside of the spiritual realm? Somehow, I'm not sure. But I love it because some of it I can't quite explain, but I can see how it's all linked together. Now what I'm wondering is, when you got right back to the source, if you become God, like the oneness, is that itself, is the oneness the centre of the grid? In other words, is that a point where all entangled opposites are completely in balance? And then I start thinking, well, is it possible that itself is inside of a sea of creatures which are all in balance? So in other words, if you become God and you can sort of look outside, what you would see let's say like a sheet of paper with all these little spheres on it. Each of those spheres would be a god. And if you went inside of that, that's when you start seeing, that's when it was split. I almost see it as if it splits off into the spiritual and the physical. And then what happens is, inside of this physical, it splits everything off into like male and female. And then, but then the other thing is, each of the opposites has the other inside of it. Because I'm reading this book at the moment called The Art of Loving, and what it says each human has inside of it masculine and feminine. So in other words, we think we are masculine, we think we're male and there's a female, but really we are actually male and female inside of ourselves. It's quite weird. So, and I also think, it makes me think of that thing of, what does it say? God created man in its image or something. So I'm starting to think to myself, what is God? Like, I don't know. And I wonder, is it actually possible to ever work that out? I do wonder about that. That sound was the sound of paper. I like that. Bing! So that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed that. And what I'm liking about this is, I'm liking how deep it goes. The other thing is, I can feel and see how, like, almost like that, you could become completely fearless. But the thing, well, it's quite hard. I could imagine waking up tomorrow and being able to do anything that I desire. Because I know that it's literally like just hitting a switch. The problem is finding the switch. That's the thing, because it's almost like all these other switches are linked to this one main switch. But as soon as you find that one main switch, I feel like the whole lot will just flip. That's it though for this one. So, well, you can find show notes and everything at sophielawson.com, and you can also see this as a video if you want it. But all that's left is this week's inspirational quote. Now I love this one as well, because there's something about this. So it says, this is what AJ from DivineTruth says. He said, do what you're afraid of to trigger the emotion. So this is like what I did during the week. I was afraid to speak to somebody, but what I did was I did what I was afraid to do, and it triggered the emotion, and it allowed me to feel the feeling of rejection. And now the thing is, like what Robert Wagner says, go towards the energy, because what you realise is, when you go towards the energy, you realise that it was like an illusion. Because the mind is creating this story that something is really scary. When you go into it, you feel the emotion. Initially, it's quite scary, I suppose. So you get an initial jolt of scariness, but then somehow it's no longer scary. And it reminds me a little bit of like the Wizard of Oz. You've got the bloke behind the curtain, and he's really scary until you look behind the curtain, and what happens is, once you've looked behind the curtain, that can't ever be scary again. So it might still sort of bring up a monster, which sort of gets you a little bit scared, but you're not afraid of it because you know it's not really a monster. There's something behind it pulling the strings. So I feel like this is what's happening here. So again, it goes into that thing of, all you've got to do is take the action, but it goes into that thing where it's easier said than done, because if the fear is so strong, even though you know it's not really something to be afraid of, you can't sort of help but be afraid of it. So it is a sort of, for me, it is a very sort of a paradoxical thing. For me, I want to interview guests on the podcast. I know that if I just step into it, I'll do it. But there's a fear there there's the fear of stepping into it and all the fears. There's also a fear, which is a strange one. There's this fear that I know that once I step into it, I'm actually going to do it, and I'm afraid to do it. Which I think that is like something to do with a fear of success or something. Which that in itself is a sort of paradox. How can you have a fear of success? Because success is like a positive, but you can actually have a fear of it. So it shows how nothing really is positive or negative. It's really more just opposites of the same thing. And this is when you start realising that even positive and negative is an illusion, which I think is what the grid is trying to tell you. The grid is trying to tell you that in the centre point, positive and negative can coexist, which means it's not really an opposite, it's the same thing. The only reason that a positive is being made positive is because you're thinking that a negative exists. And also you're putting like energy into the positive or the negative. It's quite strange. So it feels to me very much like being in a dream, and if you think, because you don't realise you're dreaming, everything is, you're scared of everything basically. As soon as you become lucid, you can start facing the fears. And I feel like it's possible to be inside of the waking state and basically be in like a lucid dreaming state inside of the physical, inside of the waking state, which that would be quite magical, that, because all of a sudden you would become fearless. So I think that's cool, and it starts with a simple step of doing what you're afraid of, which is going towards the energy. But as I said, it's easier said than done, because it goes into that thing of It's basically what it is it's the illusion. What's happened is, I think what's happening is I'm believing the illusion more than the truth. So, and I've actually thought about this a lot because I'm trying to sort of work it all out. And the way I visualised it in my head is, I'm at this point at the moment where I feel like I'm on a diving board. I'm scared of heights and I'm scared of water. And I'm looking over the edge of the diving board, and I realise I'm like 50,000 feet in the air, and below me is nothing but water. So there's no way I'm jumping off there because I'm scared of heights and I'm scared of water. But so I think, right, I'm gonna turn around and walk down the ladder, get back down to the ground. I turn around and I realise the diving board is on fire. So in other words, at the moment I feel like I'm sort of like I'm stuck on a diving board. I can't go backwards because otherwise I'll burn myself to death. And I feel like I can't go forward, but I'm realising I've got to. And it goes into that thing of having a leap. You're going to have to just take the step off the diving board and sort of see what happens. Now this is where it goes into something else that AJ says. He says you have to basically have trust in God. You could call it the universe or whatever. Because what happens is, once you take the step, what would probably happen is, I imagine, you take the step, you might start plummeting down towards the water, but like a bird will come along or something, and it will sweep you up, and it will gently take you down to the surface. And you get down to the bottom and you realise you can swim. So that's the sort of thing that happens. And it goes into that thing of like, when I sort of when I stepped into the fear of being angry, because I have sort of got a fear of being angry, because I think if I'm angry, that must make me a bad person. So there's something about that. But I stepped into it, and what it did was it took the little baby out of my life, almost as if the universe said, "Well, I can see you've resolved that one." So it's quite sort of, that's the magicalness of it, and it's almost as if you have to sort of co-create this reality with the God. But it's almost like the God can only take you so far. You've actually got to take the step off the board, and it's almost like there's a certain point where the God can only tell you what to do. It can't do any more. So if you don't do anything, you're just going to be in this state of limbo forever, until you take your step off, or until somebody pushes you off. But really, I think it's much better to take a step off yourself. So it's this thing, and what happens is once you take the step, it's almost like you're sending a message back to God or the universe saying, "Look, I trust you." And then at that point, it can start doing something, because you've moved forward, it can now start bringing things into your life to help you, like a bird to take you down to the bottom or something. But that's it. So this week's inspirational quote: "Do what you're afraid of to trigger the emotion." AJ from DivineTruth. See if you can hear Bobby. Bobby's crying. No, he's not. He's sleeping. He's snoring. Just wake him up and he looks half asleep. Oh, he's farting again, I think.